fallen in my favor. My whole life settled with a single stroke. Prior to this, I hadn't given a thought about the future or what I'd do when I was older, but now it was decided. I knew what I wanted to do, knew exactly where to go, and had the assurance I'd be able to do it. Without any mind-rending decision, without any expectation of holiness, even without any love of God, the decision had been made. I was as happy and content as a pigeon come home to roost. Now I had a life to look forward to get ready for, to plan on. Once more a decision had been made on my behalf, and once more I recognized a mysterious, inscrutable plan at work. Of course, as we'll see later when she's 15, that it wasn't exactly easy for her to get into that monastery. So she gets transferred to another school, and because it was a large school, there were two, I guess, 8th grades. Because it was a large class, we were divided into 2 sections, and whether the kids in our section had been deliberately chosen or not, we ended up with all the uninhibited, unstudious troublemakers, probably the ideal class for me. There were only 2 or 3 quiet loners. The rest seemed to share a restless, humorous, daring, wild streak of some kind. For 4 years this was my group, and while I don't think we learned anything, I didn't. I doubt any of us would deny we had a good time, got away with murder, and came away with some unforgettable memories. This just says for 4 years this was my group, so it was before 8th grade. This is where she was with her best friend when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Sally and I were together on December 8th when we heard on the radio that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. We immediately went outside to watch for Japanese planes overhead. Within the next 6 months or so, Lee, her older brother, joined the Coast Guard and spent his active duty in the Pacific on a minesweeper. Just a little bit of historical context. So here is, she's age 10 now, and they go up to Mount Whitney, where she loved to look at the stars, and she wanders away from her parents on her crutches to be alone and contemplate nature. Or I should say contemplate God in nature. I had probably been sitting on the rock less than half an hour when there occurred what, for me at least, was one of the most momentous events in my life. It was not so much a personal experience as an objective seeing or knowing. But since what I saw and knew was not through the senses or intellect, I have no idea how I saw and knew. By the way, this experience is described in one of her other books. So if it intrigues you, go buy her books and find it. It's pretty interesting. Though I tried on a number of occasions to describe this event, no description was satisfying. If anything, my words only seemed to fictionalize it. All I could do was give my impressions after the fact, such as they are. First, the whole thing took a matter of seconds. It was so quick I always referred to it as God passing by. She also refers to it as God in the woods. As if I'd caught sight of God when he wasn't looking. Though I had no impression God saw me, I was certain God deliberately wanted me to see him, that he had in fact lined this up. This seeing was so definitive and pivotal to my life that without it, my life would not be my life. I also regarded it as the most spectacular or sublime of my experiences because it left me a knowledge of God's utter transcendence, magnificence, glory, and brilliance. I would always refer to this seeing as God passing by, or God in the woods, which was my expression for God's utter transcendence. After this sighting, if anyone had ever asked me, "Have you ever seen God?" my answer would be a resounding yes, absolutely. Any other answer would only be a lie. There were 2 parts to this experience. First, I saw an immense brilliant light that momentarily cast its shadow over the entire forest. I am not sure how these 2 impressions, light and dark, fit together. Perhaps it was a case of now you see it, now you don't. I only know the light was so brilliant I couldn't see the forest. Either way, however, I know this light stunned my brain, stopped it completely. The second part is more easily describable. An instant after seeing the light, from within myself came an explosion of uncontrollable joy. In one respect, it reminded me of the balloon experience 5 years before, only this time I understood it as a grace from God, a taste, as it were, of His own glory. What I noticed about this explosion, however, was its delayed reaction. It did not happen when I first saw the light, but the instant after, a fact I always found curious. It took 2 full weeks to return to my usual self. One glimpse of God will ruin your life forever. You will never again be able to put your heart, mind, and soul into anything in this world. Simply put, Mary had kept her promise. So, after coming back from their trip to Mount Whitney, she's sitting at the dinner table, and this happened. In the middle of dinner, however, I experienced a forceful thrust or leap from within. Instantly, I knew God was passing by. Immediately, I left the table, rushed outside, and looked upward. Though I only saw its afterglow, comparable perhaps to seeing the tail of a comet, all other interests dropped away. I stood there alone and silent until its afterglow was completely gone. A few months later, I was in Grauman's Chinese theater watching a movie with 2 friends when again there came that forceful leap. I told my friends, I gotta go, and ran out of the theater to catch a glimpse of God's passing. Though the magnificent sighting of God in the woods was never repeated, for the next 4 or 5 years I periodically experienced what I called its traces, tail end, or afterglow. And so there's this interesting relationship between the interior power within and God transcendent somehow passing by. This scene of 2 girls playing dodgeball, arguing with her, kind of gets to me because I can't help but think how far we've come and what kind of arguments 10-year-old girls are having about these days. How we've come a long way. These girls became angry with me because every day in a game of dodgeball I was able to hit them out of the circle. After one of these games they came to me and said, "You think you're hot stuff because your father's rich, but we have got news for you. Christ said it would be harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to get through the eye of a needle. He also said the beggar Lazarus went to heaven and the rich man went to hell." "Yeah," her sister chimed in. "Christ loved the poor more than the rich. You read the Gospels and you'll see this is true. He was poor himself and said it was the poor who would inherit the kingdom of heaven." "He also said you can't serve 2 masters at once," added the first sister. "You can't be rich and love God too. He came for the poor, not the rich." Determined to have the last word, I said, "Well, I know one thing. I'd rather be rich and humble about it than poor and proud of it like you guys, because the proud aren't getting into heaven either." So then she starts thinking about this and trying to understand the mystery of the incarnation and the crucifixion. Now, I had always thought the notion of Christ suffering and dying for my sins totally outrageous. To blame me or anyone else for his death made no sense. It was just someone's preposterous idea. I knew that if I asked my superiors, I'd get the same old answers. So I decided as soon as school was out to go next door to the church and ask Christ directly. No sooner had I started, however, and then a wave came over me. A sense of some terrible tragedy that whisked away my questions as if they didn't count, were meaningless, childish, totally irrelevant. Before me there was only some terrible dark mystery. It was like a gray cloud, a mystery so deep my mind couldn't follow.